The coffee stain was still wet on Brittany's desk when she pointed a lacquered fingernail at Lauren and told the boss the new cleaning girl hadn't touched her workspace in days. Rick Hawkins stood there, jaw tight, scanning the mess. Lauren's face burned. She wanted to snap the mop handle in half and walk out forever. Then Rick asked her full name. She said it. He went pale. His hand gripped the doorframe. "Your father," he said, his voice cracking for the first time anyone in that office had ever heard. "Saved my life." Everything after that went silent inside my skull. Not quiet silent, the way a room goes when all the air gets pulled out of it at once. Rick Hawkins was looking at me like I was a wound he'd been carrying under his shirt for 20 years, and Brittany was frozen mid-smirk behind him, her mouth still open, her rehearsed little performance stalling out. The fluorescent tubes above us buzzed. I could smell the fake hazelnut creamer bleeding up from the stain she'd poured on purpose not 8 minutes ago. And beneath it the stale carpet and the overworked copier toner and the whole exhausted building pressing down on my shoulders. My knuckles had gone white around the mop handle. My chest felt like someone had reached in, grabbed a fistful of wiring and yanked. But to understand how I ended up standing in that doorway, a 22-year-old janitor holding a mop like a weapon while a man I'd never met choked on my dead father's name, you'd have to go back. Back past Brittany. Past the office. Past the rented room and the stray cat and the newspaper ad circled in ballpoint. All the way back to a split-level house on Ridgewood Drive in Cedarville, Ohio, and a woman named Donna Riggs pouring herself a third glass of boxed Merlot on a Tuesday night. My father was killed when I was 6, an Army captain, decorated, stationed overseas in a place no one in Cedarville could find on a map. They sent his medals home in a padded envelope. My mother kept them in a Ziploc bag in her nightstand drawer, and I used to hold them when she was too sick to get out of bed, turning them over in my small hands, feeling the cool weight of something important that I couldn't name. Mom tried. She worked checkout at the Kroger until her body quit on her. Migraines that lasted weeks, a back that seized without warning, sick days that stacked up until her manager stopped pretending to be sympathetic. We ate dinner some nights with nothing but white bread dipped in vegetable oil sprinkled with salt, or plain elbow macaroni with a pat of margarine if we were lucky. I wore clothes until the seams gave out, and then I wore them stitched. The other girls noticed. They always notice. I learned early that poverty has a sound. It's the specific pitch of laughter that follows you down a school hallway when your sweater has a visible mend across the chest. Mom died when I was 19, quietly in a hospital bed, the way people die when they've been too tired to fight for a long time. After the funeral, my Aunt Donna took me in. She lived alone in a sagging split level with vinyl siding the color of old teeth, a deck that hadn't been stained in a decade, and a recycling bin that was always full of wine boxes. She told the neighbors she was doing a kindness. What she was doing was acquiring free labor. Within a week I was cooking, cleaning, mowing the cracked little yard, and walking 4 blocks to the gas station that sold her Merlot on credit because Donna's friend Sherry worked the register. Donna never hit me. She didn't need to. She had a voice that could peel paint, and she used it nightly, usually around glass number 3, to remind me that I was a mouth she hadn't asked to feed. "When are you gonna find a man and get out of my house?" she'd say, swirling her wine, her bathrobe hanging open over a stained nightgown. She had a candidate in mind, Sherry's son, a soft-shouldered guy named Dale who managed his mother's little convenience store. Donna had it all planned out. If I married Dale, the debt she owed Sherry would evaporate, and she could waltz into that store and fill her bags without reaching for her wallet. She brought it up every single night until the words felt like a rash I couldn't scratch. I said no. I said no louder. And one evening in October, when she told me I was an ungrateful waste of grocery money, something inside me finished breaking. I didn't scream. I walked to my room, packed a garbage bag with my clothes, grabbed the mason jar of coins and small bills I'd been hiding since the week I moved in, took Dad's medals from under my mattress, and left through the back door. The screen clapped shut behind me and Donna didn't follow. She just turned up the television. The room I rented was on the 2nd floor of a narrow house owned by a widow named Mrs. Freely, who smelled like lavender talcum and moved through her own hallways like she was trying not to disturb the dust. $43 a week, utilities included. The mattress had a permanent dip in the center and the radiator clanked like a prisoner tapping code through a wall, but the door locked and the window faced east and the morning light came in warm and free. I had enough saved to cover 5 weeks if I ate carefully, peanut butter on discount bread, instant ramen when the jar ran low, tap water with a squeeze of the lemon misses. Freely left on my doorstep without comment. I needed a job immediately. I found one the way people without degrees find anything. A free newspaper from the rack inside the shop and save. Flip to the classifieds, scanning columns of listings that all required certifications or experience I didn't have. One ad didn't. A regional logistics firm on the east side of town needed a cleaning person. Nobody else was going to hire me to do anything but push a mop, so I called the number from the payphone outside the laundromat and showed up the next morning in the cleanest clothes I owned. The office was a long, low building that smelled of burnt coffee and carpet adhesive, and the HR woman who handed me the paperwork looked almost relieved to see me, which should have been a warning. The last 3 cleaners had quit. She didn't say why. I signed the contract and grabbed a bucket, and within 30 minutes of walking through the main floor I understood. The problem had a name, and the name was Brittany Corbin. I heard her before I saw her. A sharp, carrying voice that cut through the cubicle partitions like a blade through wet paper. What is that smell? Seriously, what is that? She was standing behind me when I turned around, arms crossed, hip cocked, looking at my mop the way someone looks at a dead animal on the shoulder of the road. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. High cheekbones, dark hair with a razor-clean part, eyes the color of black coffee. But it was the kind of beauty that made your skin pull tight, the kind that dared you to look and punished you when you did. She told me the mop reeked and to go rinse it with disinfectant, and she said it in a tone that made the entire floor go quiet, not out of shock but out of habit, the way animals freeze when they hear a familiar predator move through the brush. I rinsed it. I came back. I finished the floor with my jaw clamped so hard my molars ached. 2 guys near the exit were whispering. I caught fragments, something about my figure, something about feeling sorry for me, something comparing me to Cinderella and Brittany to the ugly stepsister, which would have been funny if any of them had the guts to say it above a murmur. The next 5 weeks taught me the architecture of cruelty in a small office. Brittany didn't just dislike me. She organized a campaign. She mocked my clothes with a creativity that suggested she'd been rehearsing in front of a mirror. She called my boots estate sale specials. She asked in front of 12 people, which thrift store I'd recommend for that distressed vintage look. She played a song from her phone one morning when I walked in, some pop track with the word secondhand in the chorus, and kept a straight face while the room chuckled. I cleaned around her desk every day with surgical precision, wiping every surface, emptying her trash, making sure not a single crumb survived because I knew, the way you know a dog is about to bite before it moves, that she was building toward something. There was one bright spot and his name was Chad Ellison. Nice face. Easy smile. He caught me in the hallway once, waited until the building was nearly empty after my shift, and asked if I wanted to grab coffee at the diner on Poplar Street. We sat in a booth for 2 hours and I laughed for the first time in weeks, real laughter, the kind that loosens something behind your ribs. But the next afternoon one of Brittany's satellites, a woman named Jess with a voice like a cheese grater, cornered me near the supply closet. You know he's Brittany's boyfriend, right? They're practically engaged. She will destroy you. I never went to that diner again. Chad never asked again either. He wouldn't even meet my eyes in the hallway after that. And I understood him perfectly. He'd done the math, weighed the cost, and I wasn't worth the trouble. The ache of that was quick and clean like pulling off a bandage. What hurt worse was realizing I'd been stupid enough to hope. Brittany, meanwhile, had been promoted to assistant department head, which meant she now had a title to back up the authority she'd been stealing all along. Her first act was to complain to anyone who'd listened that the office had never been dirtier. She left crumbs on her desk deliberately, spilled water near the copier and watched me scramble. And then came the morning she poured half a latte across her own keyboard, waited for Rick Hawkins to walk through on his monthly visit, and delivered the performance of her career. She timed it like a stage actress hitting her mark. Rick Hawkins walked through the front entrance at 9:30 that morning, his first site visit in 6 weeks, and Brittany was already standing beside her desk with her arms folded and her chin lifted at that precise angle that said she'd been wronged. The latte was still pooling across her keyboard, dripping in a slow brown line onto the carpet tile below. I was 15 feet away, wiping down the copier glass with a rag that smelled like ammonia, and I watched her swivel toward him like a weather vane catching wind. Honestly, Mr. Hawkins, I hate to bring it up, but the new cleaning girl hasn't touched my station in days. Look at this. Just look. She swept her hand across the mess the way a realtor shows off a kitchen. Rick's jaw tightened. He scanned the desk, then the floor, then the ring of faces pretending to type. Nobody defended me. Not one. Not Chad, who was staring at his monitor like it held the secret to eternal life. Not Jess, who suddenly needed to refill her water bottle. The room smelled like burnt hazelnut and cowardice, and the fluorescent light above my head had been flickering since 7 that morning. A tiny strobing pulse that had bored itself into the soft tissue behind my left eye. My stomach was empty. I'd skipped breakfast to save the last of the peanut butter for dinner, and the mop handle in my grip felt like the only solid thing left in the world. Brittany walked Rick to her workstation with the slow, deliberate grace of someone leading a tour through a crime scene. She pointed at the coffee stain. She pointed at a smudge on her monitor I'd never seen before that morning. She shook her head and made a soft, disappointed sound, and then she looked directly at me, not at Rick, at me, and her eyes were bright and steady and completely satisfied. My workspace is ignored entirely, she said, loud enough for the whole floor. It's dusty. It's filthy. I've been sitting in these conditions for weeks. It was a lie so clean it barely left a fingerprint. I'd wipe that desk down every single day, sometimes twice, because I knew she was watching, knew she was waiting. But a poured latte beats a clean conscience in any courtroom, and she knew that too. Rick turned to me. His face was flat, unreadable, military flat, the kind of expression that holds everything back because letting anything out would be a tactical mistake. Come to my office, he said. 2 corridors away. A door with a brass nameplate. A desk with nothing on it except a pen holder and a framed photo I couldn't see from where I stood. The air in that room was cooler than the main floor, and it smelled like leather and old paper, and for a moment I thought I might throw up. Why is the office in that condition? He asked. He didn't sit. Neither did I. My face was on fire. My throat had closed to the width of a straw. I told him the truth, that I cleaned Brittany's desk every day, that the stain was fresh, that I didn't know where it came from but I had a guess. I told him Brittany had been targeting me since my first shift, that she mocked my clothes, that she'd turned the whole floor against me. I heard my own voice crack and I hated the sound of it, hated how small and pleading it was in that cool leather-scented room. Rick watched me the way a man watches a fuse burn. He tapped the cap of his pen against the desk in a slow, even rhythm. You seem like a decent person, he said. Why does the whole office have a problem with you? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like self-pity, so I just shook my head. Then he asked my name. My full name. I gave it first, middle, last. And when I said my last name, the tapping stopped. His hand went still on the desk. His eyes changed. Something behind them shifted, like a door opening into a room he'd kept locked for a very long time. Your father, he said, and his voice was different now, rough at the edges, scraped raw. What was his name? I told him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I stood there with my mop in my ammonia-stained hands and my empty stomach, and I watched a decorated ex-soldier press his knuckles into his desk so hard the color left them entirely. Your father, Rick said, and his voice broke on the second word, saved my life. He told me then. Not everything, not yet, but enough. A firefight in a place he still couldn't name without his hands shaking. A bullet that should have killed him. A captain, my father, who dragged him 30 yards through open ground with rounds snapping overhead like angry insects. My father took the shot that was meant for Rick. Died on a dirt road 11,000 miles from Cedarville while Rick lived. Came home, built a company, and spent every year since carrying a debt he couldn't repay. He looked at me standing in his office in my threadbare polo and my discount sneakers with the mop still in my hand, and I watched something in him resolve, not soften, resolve, the way a man looks when he finally sees the move he's supposed to make. Brittany Corbin, he said quietly. She's been running that floor like her personal kingdom. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He picked up his phone. What happened next took less than 72 hours, and it dismantled Brittany's world with the clean mechanical efficiency of a man who'd spent his career identifying threats and neutralizing them. But here's the part that was mine, the part I'd earned. Before Rick made a single call, I asked him to wait. One day. That's all I needed. I went back to the main floor that afternoon and I did something I'd been preparing for without knowing it. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of photographs I'd been taking for weeks. Every coffee stain Brittany had poured and blamed on me, time-stamped. Every clean desk I'd wiped down before the morning shift. Photographed at 6:15 with the date visible on the wall calendar behind it. Every cruel remark she'd made within earshot of the break room security camera, whose red light I'd noticed on my second day and which Brittany, for all her cunning, had never once looked up to see. I'd learned something growing up poor that Brittany never had to learn. When nobody believes you, you build your own evidence. I printed every photo. I compiled a simple one-page timeline. Dates, incidents, witnesses, and I left the folder on Rick's desk the next morning before anyone else arrived. When he opened it, he didn't speak for a full minute. Then he picked up his phone and called Human Resources. Brittany was terminated that afternoon. Not quietly, officially, with a written summary of conduct violations that referenced the security footage in my documentation. She walked out carrying a cardboard box with her personal things, her heels clicking fast and uneven on the tile, and she didn't look at anyone. She didn't look at me. The floor was silent in a new way. Not the frozen silence of fear but the stunned, blinking silence of people realizing the weather has changed. Chad tried to talk to me the following week. He appeared at my desk, my new desk, because Rick had promoted me to client operations the very next day, with that same easy smile and a suggestion that we grab coffee sometime. I looked at him for a long moment. I remembered the diner, the laughter, the way he'd folded the instant Jess whispered Brittany's name. "No thank you," I said, and I meant it with every cell in my body. He wasn't a bad person. He was just a weak one, and I'd spent my whole life surrounded by weakness dressed up as practicality. I didn't need another version of it sitting across from me in a booth. Rick gave me a key to his second apartment, a clean two-bedroom he'd bought years ago for children who never came. "It's just sitting empty," he said, shrugging like it was nothing, but his eyes were wet and he turned away fast. I moved in that weekend with a garbage bag of clothes and a rescued orange tabby named Martin who'd wandered into the office through a cracked window 3 weeks earlier, and whom Brittany had once threatened to throw back out. Martin sat on the kitchen counter of our new apartment and watched me unpack with the calm, unbothered stare of a creature who'd already decided this was home. 6 months later I was enrolled at the state university, studying business, paid for by a man who said he owed my father a life and intended to start repaying it through mine. One evening I stopped at the pet store on Maple for Martin's food. The good kind, the grain-free chicken pâté he inhaled in 30 seconds flat, and a jar slipped off the shelf. A hand caught it before it hit the floor. The hand belonged to a tall guy with quick reflexes and a warm, open face and a Savannah cat at home. He talked about the way some people talk about their children. His name was Ethan. We stood in that pet store aisle for 45 minutes, talking about nothing and everything, and when he walked me home we lingered on the front steps until the streetlights buzzed on and the sky turned the color of a bruise. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed with Martin curled against my hip and my father's medals cool in my palm, and I thought about how strange it is, the math of a life. How you can lose everything, your father, your mother, your dignity, your name, and still end up standing in a warm kitchen with a cat who loves you and a jar of chicken pâté, and the phone number of a boy who caught something falling before it shattered. I pressed my thumb against the raised eagle on my father's medal and I whispered thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just out into the dark, where I hoped it might land somewhere that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope it touched something in you the way it did in me while I was telling it. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and gave this a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. And if you've ever been through something like this, if you've ever been the person with the mop, or the person who finally caught a break when you'd stopped believing one was coming, I'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to read it today.